what are some surprises, some surprising things that you have learned?
Well, no, there is. So I think there are a couple different things, right? One, like things are just like things are a lot like advertising is complex. Like advertising is
Yeah,
very complex, and
sure.
as much as we try to as much as we try to make a science out of it, it's definitely there is an art to it that we need to keep in the loop, right?
Hey, what's going on?
Chika, what's going on, homeboy?
Nothing much. How are you?
Good, I'm good. First off, congratulations on getting married.
Oh yeah, thank you so much.
You're a married boy right now. You're
I'm working
taken.
on. I'm engaged. I'm working on getting married.
Dude, congrats, man. So excited.
Thank you so much.
How does it feel?
What's up?
How does it feel?
It feels good. It feels good. It feels like I feel grounded.
Yeah, yeah, dude. I'm psyched for you. I'm psyched for you. You need to remind her she won the big prize.
It's hilarious.
Oh man. All right. It's good
I feel like I won. I feel like we should both feel like we won.
Of course, 100%. All right, it's good to see you, man. I wanted to have a chat for you, a chat with you, because we've been, we've spoken multiple times, had fun, whatnot. But I wanted to record this and upload this to Talking Business, the podcast that I run. If that's all good with you.
That's all good.
All right. So before we get started, would you mind like giving the listeners a quick little intro about your background and what it is that you're currently up to? You know, the people might not know that you're, a crime vigilante, a crime fighting vigilante, keeping the streets safe at night.
Yeah, no, I'm retired from that. No, no, but yeah, no, for sure. My name's Chika Umeadik. I am. I think if I think about my overall kind of mission and passion, my goal and mission is to build the world into a better place. Right now, I'm a product manager at Google. I also run a research and development firm in Nigeria called Parallel Score, and I invest in early stage startups with a vehicle that I started called Tiphub.
Okay, so you mentioned the R&D firm that you got going on.
Sure.
Would you mind expanding on that a little bit?
Sure, yeah. So part of Parallel Score, the core mission of Parallel Score is to not just, explore emerging technology trends and apply them to developing market challenges, but like also think about global challenges and figure out ways that that Nigerian engineers can contribute to those pressing issues. One of the things we found when we started Parallel Score was that there's this conception that if you outsource your engineering to developing markets or places like India, you get it's only for like web and mobile app development, right? There were like really meaty problems that we wanted to solve, and we wanted to show that Nigerian developers could solve those problems. So what we did is we gave them the space to do that by taking a parallel approach, right? Parallel track approach. On one end, you want to give engineers the luxury to explore, not just luxury, but the space to explore and understand these emerging technologies. So in the work that we were doing, we were giving technologists or engineers the luxury of going to explore these new emerging trends. And what does that mean tangibly? Going and actually trying to build proof of concepts, learning new concepts around AI, blockchain, et cetera, et cetera. And then on the other side of it, we gave them the opportunity to apply those challenges. So you've just learned about blockchain. Now, can you build a consent engine to help ensure that patients are at the center of their healthcare data, right? And so what we were doing is essentially taking research and development concepts and figuring out ways to commercialize / apply them to really not just local problems, but global problems as well. As a result of that company, we've been able to spin out, I think, 2 or 3 companies that have done pretty well in the last couple of years. The idea behind that is that, once again, you can research and develop all you want, but it really hits the road once you think about commercialization and actually driving solutions for customers on the enterprise and then even on the consumer side.
Yeah, that's very fascinating. Who educated these developers? Are you guys doing that as well, or are they coming into it with knowledge of computer science?
Yeah, no. So most of the time, so it's not necessary. Yeah, most of the time, a lot of the engineers we work with have, they're capable. They're capable. They have like great skills. It's not just about, they have engineering skills. It's, I think one of the great traits of a good engineer is being able to learn about new concepts and being self-driven. So it's less about who teaches and more about who gives the space for engineers to learn those concepts and apply them, right? So a lot of the folks we have are brilliant and have very sound engineering development skills. It's more about just here's what we think might work, here's the time and the place to do it, and here's the project to apply it. Yeah, that's a really good point. If I look at the work that I'm doing myself with YRC, it's kind of like the shorthand is 21st century business education, 21st century entrepreneurship education, essentially. We go heavy on implementation as well, because I think, right now, there's a lot of information available to you on the internet. You can pretty much find whatever you want. There is an additional problem there, which I think doesn't get talked about enough, which is that, if there are 2 ways to hide information, the first one is to hide it by actually hiding it, but the second one is to hide it by crowding it out. And I think that's something that we're seeing in the internet. Like, theoretically, everything is findable, but it takes a lot of effort when there's a lot of fluff surrounding it. So if you want to learn like something about mathematics or quantum mechanics, the internet is like, it's the best possible place. But if we're talking about marketing, then it's so difficult because there's so much nonsense, and you only learn to discern what is true from what is bullshit once you have gathered sufficient expertise. But by that time, you no longer need that information, because you already have the skill of step. You recognize this is true because you already know that it's true. So the people although that's a really good point. I never thought of it like that. Like, I think to your point, I think what ends up happening is that there are certain skill sets that are perceived as accessible, right?
Yeah.
And if it's accessible, then people tend to say that they're doing it without actually understanding what it really means, right? So, like for marketing, for example, there are like marketing is an accessible capability, right? Everyone feels like they're marketing, right? And you see like a lot of people on TikTok, you see a lot of people on Instagram saying that they're marketing something, right?
Don't get me started. Don't give it.
I know. On Twitter, someone's marketing something, right? And the more you dilute if you there's like the common perception of the more you dilute, not necessarily, I'll get the dilution part, but the more accessible something is at the surface level, the more the surface level becomes like the most engaged part of the conversation.
Yeah,
right.
That's interesting.
And so I think like that normally tends to happen in a lot of spaces. Specific marketing is a great use case where people want to grasp the concepts, but then don't want to understand the meat of what they're driving. And it creates a fragmented kind of conversation around what at the core, like what the technical and the technical and like the scientific components of marketing versus kind of just this high level I want to be anchored to the idea that I'm marketing as an individual.
Yeah, I think you're spot on with respect to the accessibility point. I think there's another variable which needs to be included as well, which is how much room is there to hide. So if you take something like if you take something like algebra, algebra is very accessible, or maybe even like one step lower, like basic arithmetic. That's super accessible, but there's no room to hide there because I can immediately call you out. If you say like some silly equation which is obviously wrong, some manipulation of like fractions, and you come to the wrong conclusion, I can show you like, dude, what the fuck are you talking about? So we have that accessibility, but there's a lack of room to hide. And when it comes to marketing, the marketing system is so opaque, and I think that's therein the combination of those two factors is where the problem lies essentially, because you have an input, a box, and then an output. And if you have an input and let's say a black box and the output, and the relationship between the input and the output is crystal clear, then you can quite easily discern the necessary components of the black box. So that's, now I'm essentially talking about things like classical, Newtonian physics, classical mechanics, because you don't need to know everything about gravity. We still, I shouldn't say we, because I'm more of a pure mathematician than a physicist, but people don't quite understand how gravity works, because this is a very complicated problem. But for simplicity's purpose, for the sake of simplicity, you don't need to know that much, because there are so many variables that don't matter when it comes to describing, like, one-dimensional, two-dimensional motion and stuff like that. And I think the problem in marketing specifically is that this relationship between the input and the output is so difficult to discern, partly because there are so many variables that interact, but also because the system constantly changes as a function of the entrepreneurs. So if you in mathematics, once you have figured something out, you can say, you can sit back and say, whew, I never have to revisit that again. Because even if it's like 1,000 years old, if it's true, it will remain true in perpetuity. But that's not the case for marketing. Even if you're super careful with your reasoning, you run your experiments, you gather your data, you say, okay, we can say this for sure. We know how, this actually, you have the input, then we don't know fully understand the black box, but this is the output. The entire black box can change because people are always looking for, an advantage. So take something which is fairly obvious. You price elasticity, and price inelasticity, and using prices in order to spike demand or what have you. So you can you can come to a conclusion that, okay, we decrease our price and quantity demand goes up, and it's like, okay, that's easy. And then someone says, okay, wait a minute, there are so many cheap competitors out there. What if we take the opposite approach? And this is my mentor, Rory Sutherland. He always makes this point. In business, the opposite of a good idea can be another good idea. Well, usually in mathematics or physics, whatever, the opposite of a good idea, a good approach, is wrong. So I think that combination makes it difficult. There's the accessibility, which you mentioned, and then there's a lot of room to hide, because if someone says something, it's, again, to my earlier point, it takes quite a bit of expertise to say, okay, based on all the information that I've gathered over my decades of experience, what you're saying is extremely unlikely to be true. But most people don't have that because it's not their field of expertise. So they see something and it's quite difficult to, understand, is this true? Is this false? It all sounds logical. It all sounds plausible. So there's a lot of room for bullshit. And my final point, by the way, is that the incentive structure is also wrong. Because there are a lot of incentives which are pushing you towards promoting bullshit, essentially. Like, Simon Sinek, Start With Why. It's a very lightweight book, and the premise is I know few marketing scientists that agree with the premise. Usually start with why. Usually it's like start and get to product market fit, and then later on hire a PR firm to pre-rationalize the why and tie it up into a neat little story. Like, okay, well, we started with this why, and we saw this urgent problem, and then my mom said, and my auntie, and then you manufacture this story. So I think all of these components push you towards this domain of nonsense.
And it's kind of funny we're talking about this right now, because it's kind of like, when I think of like research and development in general, like part of it is a lot of it is a black box. that is
Yeah.
hard to evaluate, right? Like you can
Yeah.
you can spend a year or two on a research project and come out with, you know, like a bad outcome, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
We
Yeah.
do as much as we can to standardize the R&D process on our line of work to make it a little bit more scientific. But in reality, like we don't know from a technology perspective, sure, like you can validate whether something works or not pretty well, right? But then let's say you've kind of built a POC and you have a hypothesis on how this would engage in the market. You have customer feedback, you have all of these things that help you kind of infer that. Even with all of those inputs, you still have like this moving, like you mentioned, that like you still have this moving target of the market, right? And
Yeah.
once your product hits the market, once our thesis or our MVP hits the market in terms of how to engage customers and then who knows about the MVP and all of these other things, a lot of weird things start happening. You know, you can be, there are times you can be too early in something, right?
Yeah.
There
Very
are
true.
times where you might have over engineered something, right? It's like you built this like beautiful thing, but the real value is this one area here that's only like 25% of your product, right?
The point versus group, the point versus Groupon.
Yeah, exactly. So there's a lot of what you mentioned specifically in marketing applies to the research and development frameworks that we've put together to drive like good outcomes overall in a repeated manner.
Tell me a little bit more about that. That sounds super interesting. The processes and the systems that you guys have created in order to, you know, make this more standardized.
Yeah, so there are four kind of work. There are four lanes. We kind of four pillars, right? So there's on top of those four pillars, there's kind of like these horizontal like concepts that we drive, right? So there's experimentation, there is research, like literacy, and then there's data, right? So like these are like the three areas we kind of try to imbue in our workflow process. So one area is like developing competency. So if we come up with an idea, like an engineer may not know, like they're you know, like neural networks have been around for a while, but like once again, not a lot of people have, you know, you don't have like a general population understanding of neural networks. So if an engineer is like, okay, let me learn about neural networks. So there's one lane there. And in that lane, there's a literacy component, there's a data component, and then there's an experimental component. So at this point, the engineer is essentially trying to catch up on all of these concepts. So inputs for that lane are research papers, books, POCs on GitHub, all of these different things that can essentially help them get a better understanding of like neural networks, for example, right?
Yeah.
The second area is problem solving. So we come with potential problem opportunities, and the idea is like we have to find problem fit, right? So which problem are we best primed to solve, right? Based on the literacy, like based on not the literacy layer, but based on the like competency layer, right? So maybe like, you know, one of the things you'll find is that a lot of our teammates have very unique experiences in terms of interests, right? So maybe one of them might be music, right? So music there might be some interesting areas in music. There might be some interesting areas in healthcare. There might be some interesting areas in sports. Football is a really not American football, but you know, the rest of the world football might be, you know, something that's super interesting, right? And so we start thinking about like interesting areas that are valuable as a first opportunity to like explore what this technology can do. So let's just say, let's take football, for example. And so now you have, and then you have those inputs again that I mentioned. So now you have a competent engineer that has an interest in football, and there are probably some really interesting areas in football that you can solve, right? And then the next level is like application. So it's not necessarily just about building something, but it's about building something that solves a particular challenge within that realm of football, right? So let's say, for example, let's say I am a betting man and I want to figure out, I want to be able to watch videos. I want to be able to like train a model on a neural network to help me predict like football moves against like different players as they're playing, right? Like, let's just say something like that, right? And so part of that is now, once again, application, or so, literacy, data, and then experimentation. So figuring out what that looks like and breaking it down into pieces and milestones, and then executing against like this idea that, hey, I want to be able to like do this. And then once you have like an application that like solves that particular problem within the space, and it doesn't have to be robust. It can just be like, it literally could just be me showing you a command line and then also showing you like the outputs of whatever I did, right? Once you have that, now we think about scale and application, right? And so that's like the last layer. And then we say, okay, so we've solved this for this particular problem. Do we want to continue to solve this for this specific area, or are there other areas that we can compare, right? So a lot of training videos is a lot of that is like vision AI, right? Are there other visual challenges that might be valuable, and how can we scale that? So part of that input is customers, part of that input is interest in the engineers, part of that input is, kind of a market analysis of like opportunities, and then also building. And so then we go from like a rough POC to a like more like an MVP in a market that we're interested in, and that the engineer is interested in, and that we kind of can, we have some market validated research on like how to play. Normally comes with a couple of customers or a couple of interested parties. And so what we've done in that time is that we've leveled up someone that can now lead a team to build a very interesting solution using an emerging technology. But we've also validated this in 2 areas, right? So it's like one in sports, and then let's say one in healthcare, right? And so normally what that does is it gives us enough data to now, kind of validate whether we should invest more, or we should kind of think about how to spin it out, or it gives us enough. It's kind of like tiptoeing through the ice until you feel more confident that you can walk on ice without having to think about cracks. And so that's the approach we take.
Yeah, I love that approach, which is, partly why why we're friends, because you always tend to gravitate towards people who view the world through a similar lens as you do. But it's a very smart way in order to mitigate risk as best you can, versus going all out and just praying that as a function of creating all of this hype, building the hype machine, that you can somehow incite demand, which it can happen, but the probability is so low that I think it's not a good way to go about it. What kind of check sizes are you guys writing during that initial phase, the first phase where it's still POC MVP?
Yeah, so in terms of POC MVP, so and that's a really good question, because it gets at like our methodology. It's like we're gatekeeping at every time, we're gatekeeping at every level, and we kind of look at it as like a quarterly. We kind of look at it as a quarterly gate. So quarterly gates normally include the cost of the team, the cost of the technologies. So like servers get expensive, or cloud servers get expensive. Cloud computing in general gets expensive for some of these like very resource heavy projects. And then any auxiliary challenges, any auxiliary costs that we might have. So at times it's like I think it's like probably like $25,000 to $50,000 a quarter in terms of what we're spending, and then how we gatekeep or we gate investments over time.
And then you guys get a piece of the equity, I assume.
Well, no. So this for Parallel Score, we get it's more about like birthing. It's more about birthing projects that can spin out on our end. So we actually own most of the equity. So it's just the more that we decide to invest, the more the project gets moved along and the likelihood that it can spin out. We did the first one for a client. So we did the first one for a client where we got some equity, but the last two spin outs have been fully ours in terms of ownership. So we're not necessarily like we give out equity when and if we need to raise capital.
Got it. All right. Let me change gears here a little bit. It's always difficult because there are so many directions in which we can travel. All right. Talk a little bit about what you're doing at Google.
Sure. Yeah. So
your background, job-wise.
Yeah. No. So currently at Google right now, I work in the ads division or ads business, specifically for automated campaigns. So my specific area is in app installs and engagement. So the app lifecycle. So think about excuse me, individuals that want to get app engagement or app engagement in general will come to us and say, hey, we want to advertise for installs or pre-list or like sign-ups or app engagement. And then we've created an automated campaign that kind of creates automated creatives, automated bid strategy, automated budget strategy, and essentially just runs without having to think about all the different levers. It kind of just takes the complexity down. It decreases the complexity from traditional advertising to like 3 levers.
Interesting. So what are those main 3 levers?
Yeah, so bid, budget, and assets. So you provide us the assets that get turned into creatives. You tell us your bid strategy, and then you tell us the budget you want per day.
I see. And what was the whole line of thinking that drove you in this direction?
Yeah, I had not had any ads experience before, and I wanted to explore like that space, that world, just to understand. I think like right now the tradition, like incumbent monetization strategy for the internet is ad supported. I think we're definitely shifting for sure. I think slowly going to start
micro payments.
No, I think micropayments might be something. I also think that like a lot of this metaverse crypto talk might be something that might be interesting as well. Subscription stuff is becoming interesting as well. But I think for like the main web, we'll probably see ad supported be like the dominant thing for a while. But I think there's the web's big. There's more than enough space for different revenue models. So but it would just I just wanted to understand. I wanted to understand a little bit more from a technical perspective the ad space, and I think I'm getting schooled. I'm getting schooled in what that looks like and what it means. So it's good.
What are some surprising things that you have learned?
Well, no, there is. So I think there are a couple different things, right? One, like things are just things are a lot. Like advertising is complex. Like advertising is very complex, and
sure.
as much as we try to make a science out of it, it's definitely there is an art to it that we need to keep in the loop, right?
Especially when it comes to creative, I think, because the more
exactly
Exactly. Yeah. Because also when you boil things down to a formula, it's important to remember that everyone can use that formula. So if you look at something like mathematics, where you have the quadratic formula, which is a useful tool that you can use in order to solve polynomials, everyone can, or a specific kind of polynomial, everyone can use that tool, but you using it doesn't matter to me. It's not a zero-sum game situation, but in advertising that's not true. So if you're using a specific approach and it's all about I need to target, I need to do all of these things in order to win essentially, and your competitor is doing the exact same thing, then you lose your competitive edge essentially, and the only guys who are winning are you guys, Google. So,
there are a lot of other winners, but I think
but yeah, my point was that creative allows you to get an unfair advantage in a sense.
I agree. And I think the goal, I actually manage, so my area is assets. So
Okay.
I think when I think about like what things may look like, I think that there's definitely, I think the conversation, you're right, like how do you create an unfair advantage for advertisers using creatives, right? And I think the most important thing is that you give advertisers across the different types the tools and the resources to empower them to make the best creative possible, right? Or the best assets possible. And what does that mean? It means that they're empowered to create assets that like align with their audiences. They're aligned, they create assets that are aligned with their objectives. So if you want me to, re-engage or do whatever, install, like I want assets that can help them do that. I also want advertisers to have assets that are like you said, differentiated and help them get a competitive, like a unique advantage. And that's definitely an area that's interesting to me.
What are some mistakes that people are making?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think like one of the mistakes, I think a lot of mistakes just in advertising in general is that people stick to what works. Right. And so when I talk about that could be like channels, that could be like channels and surfaces, that could be messages. But I think that, there are new channels for advertising opening up every day. And it's not just even like taking a Google, like going back, like not even like with my Google hat off, like there are new channels every day to advertise. And I think while you have your bread and butter is most likely going to get, your bread and butter is going to continue to get more competitive, right? So you should always have a percentage of your of your allocation for emerging channels.
Yeah, and trying weird stuff essentially.
Exactly. And so I think like emerging channels slash bets, bets in like specific channels help to unlock opportunities and help capture your attrition that you're getting from a competitive bread and butter channel, right? And in the long term, it could de-risk, like, for example, like if we like Instagram marketers, right? Like you're one algorithm, like you're one change of the algorithm away from seeing a 15% drop in your engagement, right?
Yeah.
So how do you mitigate against that? By kind of reinforcing your engagement with other channels, right? And so I think like those are the type of things that I think about. Like you should have a portfolio approach. Like you should definitely have your channels that you go to, but you need a certain 5 to 10% that you're experimenting with new channels, and then you're also using that to inform where you can be allocating and getting like acquisition cheaper, or impressions, or whatever you need cheaper than kind of your bread and butter channels.
Yeah, again, there are like 15 different directions that that we can take this in, but Yeah, I think you're completely right. The research shows that what you are saying is important for actually another reason, because you are essentially talking about risk mitigation and diversification. But in the research, they talk about omni-channel marketing, and one of the things that we've pretty reliably have seen is that when you target consumers on multiple platforms, you get a 1+1 = 3 kind of effect. So you're better off spending chopping your marketing budget up into several pieces and using them on a variety of different channels versus putting everything on television or everything on Google. Hopefully this doesn't get you in trouble. Your boss is like, it's like, never go with that dude's podcast.
No. Diversification.
I'm kidding.
Diversification works.
Exactly. But yeah, so you have this, you can stretch your budget, get more bang for your buck essentially by chopping it up into pieces and using it on a variety of different places, because your consumers everywhere, they're not just on television, they're not just on the internet. So if you have an outside presence, be it out of OOH, out of home advertising, just things that billboards or like posters, in combination with a television ad, in combination with advertising on Google and etc. People will see you at different places, during different states of mind, essentially, because the one time they see you and it's just like it's just a reinforcement that you exist. But if they see your AdWords ad, for example, then they're in a different frame of mind. It's likely that they were searching for a particular search query, which signals like a kind of buying intent, or at least a more active degree of that.
Yep, I totally agree.
Yeah. All right. Let me ask you something about metrics. What are some of the things that people should think about? I know for the last, let's say, 5 to 7 years or something, people were talking a lot about engagement. It was all about engagement. Recently, I've seen in the marketing science community, people have stepped back off of that a little bit. What has been your insights on this particular thing?
Yeah, no, I think depending on it always depends on like the business model, right? Like, I think if I think about like some of the challenges that I think about some of the marketing goals that a lot of advertisers have, and then like even some of the things that I do outside of Google, it's like, what do I want people to do, right? So like, I think like most of the stuff that I have is like installs, right? But it depends on like what part of the funnel you're looking at, right?
Yeah, good point.
So like interactions, like like reach could mean like, okay, you have like your maximum universe, and then of that people are interacting, okay, great, and then people are clicking, great, but like what you really care about is that the person's completing. If you're optimizing for like, hey, get some installs, like you want someone to like click, you want someone to get like, you want to get as many installs as possible, right?
Yeah.
So in a cost efficient way, right? And so I think like depending on like your goals as an advertiser or marketer, like that drives essentially what you're looking for. So like how we kind of like structure things a little bit, how we structure things is like we look at like the overall app life cycle, right? So for example, like a lot of apps like will like pre-register. So I want to use pre-registration as a signal to see whether I should like continue to invest in this game, or like if there's good signal to like launch this game, right? Or
what does that mean?
Whatever app.
What do you mean by pre-registration?
So like, for example, if you see an advertisement for an app, right, and you click on it, it shows that you're interested in the app, but the app may not be out yet, right? What I'm optimizing for is to understand that, hey, there are people that are interested and they're willing to pre-register, right? Yeah. So that's a signal that I'm looking for. If I'm looking for, go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, I just wanted to say that it reminds me of Joel from Buffer, with I don't know if you know the story, but like with the landing page, and then okay, yeah, you know, and then later he added prices, and then you could click on it, and then you got a pop-up box which said, you know, we're working on it, leave your email, etc. if you're interested. It's a smart way to get that very important feedback versus just waiting until you've built the entire thing, and then then you only get that feedback once you've launched.
Yeah, so you have to think about it. I think about it as a life cycle. So like, what part of the life cycle are you in, and then what do you want to optimize for at that point in the life cycle? So like, let's say you've gotten your app out, and you've gotten whatever product out, and then now you have like a good audience, but like, what else do you want? Like, your app isn't just about installing it. Like, what else do you want people to do? Are there actions? Are there activities? Do you want people to sign up? Do you want people to create a profile? Like, all of these engagement, like, you have to like get more granular on engagement, right? So similar to the buffer example, it's not just giving your email, it's looking at the pricing, it's looking at what buffer does. There are all of these. I think about it as a journey, like the customer journey. Like, what do you want the customer to do, or how do you want them to engage, and how do you get them to an engaged point where they're going to easily convert into being a consistent user in your like app or product.
Yeah. Do you think marketers nowadays are too concerned with vanity metrics, or do you think that they're doing a good job of focusing on the metrics that are the most important?
Depends on which marketers you're talking about.
Always true. That's true. That's true. In general.
No, but I think performance marketers are like more like scientifically driven marketers understand like the complexities of like relying on vanity metrics. Like, I think like a lot of good marketers understand that like one data point tells a whole story, right? Or one data point is part of a whole story, right? So piecing data points together to essentially like give you your funnel or your customer journey is what is essential. And the best marketers understand that and execute on that. And I think like ideally, like in the ideal world, what you as a marketer, what you want to focus on at the end of the day is being able to say, okay, I have my life cycle, I have my journey, right? Now, how do I optimize like these particular areas? So like, let's say, I'm at the interaction phase. Like, what can I do to increase my interactions? Like, do I have to change my creatives at this point, or do I have to change my assets? Or do I have to, or if I get installs, like, okay, I got all the way to installs. Now, how do I get people to engage, right? And so every part of the funnel tells a different part of the story. And like, I think the best marketers have an overall perspective on what they're looking at, if they're looking at like from a funnel perspective, and then overall in general, when you take a larger view, I think if you're looking at like omni-channel marketing, or if you're looking at something like that, there's no way that you can, there's no way for you to do that without being holistic in how you're approaching things. And vanity metrics normally are one piece of the puzzle, but you need that piece of the puzzle to see the whole story.
Yeah, it's interesting. David Ogilvy actually, he really stressed the importance of being able to measure stuff. He was quite harsh, actually, to the best of my knowledge. Probably Rory knows this a little bit better, because he knows when and where David Ogilvy changed his mind. But he was quite harsh towards like marketers who weren't able to measure stuff, so brand marketers and stuff like that, because of these things that you have mentioned. It's very hard. You run into this black box situation again, where you have an input, you have a black box and an output, and the relationship between the input and the output is very difficult to discern. But then you also have guys like Bill Bernbach, who emphasize the necessity of art and creativity much more. Those guys, Bernbach, Leo Burnett, also to a degree, I think, they were more, I don't know if I should say like more comfortable, but they stressed this this aspect of marketing more. And I think something that you see is a slight bifurcation between performance marketers, essentially, where your world is somewhat more clean, in the sense that, you know, it's easier to follow a more strict scientific process, where it's like, okay, I have a hypothesis how I can make this particular number go up, versus, you know, a brand marketer, where oftentimes your time horizon also is quite long, you know, because suddenly you're not thinking in a 3-week interval, you're thinking in, like, you know, a 3-year interval.
Yeah, I think with brand marketing is not for the faint of heart. It's actually really, it's one of the more challenging areas. I think that the one misconception is that brand marketers often think they sit on an island. And I think that the real opportunity is to be married, like, to the hip with your omni-channel teams that are, like, managing each of these channels. If you're looking at, like, a more scaled business, to understand the overall implications of, you know, brand marketing movements and motions on, like, the funnel implications, right? And I think, like, a lot of it's, like, doing, like, more longitudinal studies, like sensitivity analysis around understanding, like, hey, if we tweak this brand message, or we deploy a new brand strategy or a brand marketing strategy, like, what are the implications, and what levers, like, not at the top level, but, like, what actually happens even if it is, like, causal, like, it will be causal, right? Like or correlated, like, figure out, like, what that does, and then how it affects, like, people downstream. Like, because there's always, regardless, I mean, there's always an impact. Sometimes it's negative, sometimes it's positive, but it's there to evaluate. The challenge is that I don't think that there is enough support for brand marketers in exploring those kind of questions, specifically because that goes into the realm of, like, econometrics and like data science support and, like, economics teams, and trying to figure out, like, these kind of, like, relationships, right? But I do think it'll be helpful. I think it's helpful. It's something that I think about too, like, what's the value of brand marketing to our advertisers? And so, yeah, no, those are just my thoughts.
Yeah, especially if you look at, like, you know, the VC firms in Silicon Valley, etc. Like, you know, the vast majority of their value lies in branding. You know, why do founders want to go to Sequoia? You know, it's brand, essentially.
I mean, yeah, like, that's actually a really good point. So it's like perceived brand, perceived brand versus, like, actual value, like, actual, like, tangible value. And I mean, after, okay, so, like, you know, I think, like, it's a tad, so, like Andreessen Horowitz, Sequoia, kind of the bigger dogs, like, they understand the value, and essentially they have allocated, like, a lot of their proceeds from transactions into building, like, brands as defensible moat in the way that they kind of think about, like, the strategy to win deals, right? So the idea with them is that, hey, we want to be known as, like, the most conducive place for companies to come and win. And so in order to do that, we have to exude a brand that we're getting the best deals, and then we're also providing the most resources, intangible and tangible resources, in a way that that no one else can do. And so what ends up happening is that people see this, and they're like, and it's never like, it never comes to, like, there's, like, so there's, like, us talking about it right now as, like, okay, these are the people we think about, and it's just from, like, brand impression, right? So we see the docs that go out, we see the announcements that go out, and that is a brand building activity. But where it really works is in these conversations where, you know, you have a list of investors you have to reach out to, and we're like, okay, well, we have to signal to everyone on our cap table that we're serious. So we're going to go after Andreessen Horowitz, or we're going to go after Sequoia. so that one, their brand equity can like signify a premium on our cap table, and then signal that to all the other investors that see us, and they're like, okay, well, these guys invested in you, they have a track record of doing X, Y, and Z, we want to participate. So there, I think that, you know, it's funny you bring this up right now, because I think like brand for VC has become almost like a premium, like not a premium, what is a premium? I mean, it's essentially a markup on overall valuation, and accelerates the ability to get things done for teams that have good like brand signals on their cap table, regardless of whether the opportunity is like, let's forget if an opportunity is good or not. If you can signal that an opportunity is good, an opportunity will be inherently become good, which is a whole nother conversation. But that's something that's really interesting from a brand perspective that a lot of these firms have been able to do.
Yeah, I think this is actually something that's super interesting, because oftentimes when people talk about a moat, immediately, you know, your mind goes to a technological moat, you know, superior technology, stuff like that. But you know, with my background in marketing, obviously, I think there's a huge untapped there's a lot of untapped potential when it comes to using psychology in order to, you know, create value and build moats, essentially. So whether or not you're talking about brand or something like just signals, because I always think that people are a little bit too harsh on that stuff, in the sense that there's this assumption that people sometimes make, which is that, you know, those kind of tricks work on other people but not me. You know, you see this same ideology. You hear it when people talk about advertising. You know, it's like, yeah, advertising works on everyone else except me. But you know, if everyone says that, and it would be the case, then, you know, why does the advertising industry exist, and why is it doing so well? So it doesn't really make sense. So I think thinking about psychology and how you can use psychology is something that we're going to see much more in the future, and also because we're running up against you know, diminishing ROI in the technology space, not necessarily in every domain, obviously. You know, there are a lot of domains where, you know, the ROI is super big, but there are also areas where you know, ROI is decreasing. If you look at something like the iPhone, it has been incremental innovation for a large number of years. And I'm not discounting the fact that at some point, you know, we're going to get a next step of innovation. But in the meantime, I think, you know, it's worth thinking about, okay, how can we use psychology in order to create value? And I think, you know, I try and stay away from Apple usually, because it's such an outlier among outliers. But I think one of the things that they have done really well is realizing the value of design, you know, which is essentially psychology, because for a robot, design is irrelevant. You know, it just needs to do the technological stuff well, and the rest is irrelevant. But human beings often use design as a heuristic for quality, where it's like, okay, it looks cool, it makes me feel nice, ergo, just like you said, you know, if something is perceived as good, then, you know, it becomes good. You get this self-fulfilling prophecy, which I think is very interesting.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you're right. I think here's the thing. I think there are a couple different things here. So one of the things that I run into, especially when I think about like investing globally, is that a lot of people find it really hard to grasp like intangible things, right?
Yeah.
So I think about like one of the challenges I have with like limited partners, potential limited partners, is that a lot of them have made money in like real estate, a lot of them have made money in oil, a lot of them have made money in these like tangible things. And then when you tell them, oh, you can make money investing in like tech startups or whatnot, like tech startups are kind of intangible until they're not, right?
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to like kind of go from like very tangible to like intangible, especially like when you think about a spectrum of assets, right? And so from a marketing perspective, or even from an engagement perspective, I think people oftentimes are really good at like taking, even though there are even bias in like what you taking, like what you see at face value. I think like there's a spectrum of taking what you see at face value, and then there's on the other side of the spectrum, there's an understanding of that there are so many different factors at play that can be manipulated to help you take what you take at face value. And I think that if you go down that path, right, you start to see that there's so many different levers, right? And I think it's really hard for people to do that, because once you get into like complexity, it's the same reason, like I think to make the conversation go full circle, it's the same reason why like accessible algebra or accessible geometry is taught to like it's taught to 8th graders, but they're probably like or 6th or 7th graders. There's not, you know, I don't think these kids are learning calculus. It's not that calculus is any more challenging, right? There's some parts of calculus that's actually like easier than I would say easier than geometry at least. But like it's because like, one, you have that foundation, but two, I think that there are a lot more inputs in like, there's a lot more inputs in like more calculus driven like math, right? And people get afraid of complexity. But there are a group of people, there are people that look at that complexity and kind of just make mental models and like, okay, well, actually, this is very simple. Look at this, this, and this. And those people that are able to take the complex and actually simplify it and see it for what it is, are the people that end up being able to leverage it the way that you mentioned. It's just that a lot of people are still stuck in like looking at these complex areas like psychology and just say, oh wow, that's very, you know, there are too many variables, like, you know, I'm not interested. And I think that's where as you mentioned, I think there's a massive opportunity to rethink. I think if I put my product hat on, there are a lot of opportunities to rethink product development, not using technology as a key driver of like innovation, but like thinking about human behavior as the main innovative driver. Like how do you change human behavior, or how do you leverage or alter human behavior to create more value for your product, which is even more interesting.
Dude, I could not agree more. I think that's such a good point. I have this conjecture, which is that the next wave of innovation, you know, to a large extent, not uniformly, will come from, you know, these companies who use psychological economic value creation to their advantage, which is, you know, creating value by messing with the way things are perceived versus creating value by, you know, addressing solving an issue through technological means. However, there is one thing which I've spent a lot of time thinking about, but I haven't been able to solve it yet, which is that, you know, when it comes to innovating through technology, the moat comes built in, you know. So if you look at like SpaceX or Tesla, like, you know, the moat is there. It's in the technology, because what the problem that you've solved is so difficult. Whereas in psychology, you can solve a problem which is equally difficult, but you're solving it, you know, in a very creative fashion. However, people can just steal it from you. So I think that is one thing which can throw a monkey wrench into works. You know, how do you end up with this defensibility once you've solved a problem using a psychological approach? And I think the solution probably lies in having deep pockets, such that you can you know, create branding and you know, the right assets. So if I think of companies like you know, Lyft, Uber, or all of these delivery companies, I think you want to the technological problem is not that difficult, you know. Of course, we're talking about, you know, mathematics and optimization problems and yada yada yada. You catch my drift, but it's like, you know, it's a different level of complexity versus, you know, what Elon Musk is doing, where it's like, I'm trying to get to Mars, you know, or you're building a quantum computer, or it's not hard tech. Is essentially what I'm trying to say. And I think under those situations, it does make sense to, get be top of mind for consumers, so that if they want to order, takeout or whatever, you are the first one that comes to mind. Have the right distinctive assets, go hard on your advertising such that they see you everywhere, etc. And I can understand, as much as we rail against people who are wasting money, where the CAC and LTV start to look a little bit wonky. It does make sense from that perspective, because you don't really have a moat, And you saw this with Groupon, by the way. Groupon went to market. The problem was mainly a problem that was solved by psychology, in essence. Very simple group deals presented in a very funny way, with copywriters, a lot of whom were comedians, and this very warm, inviting thing. And on top of that, the offer was good, which is also marketing I believe that that's also marketing, because you have the 4 P's, the first of which is product. So product means you figure out what the thing is that you need to build for your consumers. But then everyone cloned them. They had it figured out, and like everyone copied them immediately, which is something that you can't do when it comes to like a Tesla battery, where it's like, okay, how do you make a good battery with range and all of that stuff? So I do think that that's an interesting issue which you need to be aware of.
Yeah, I think so. I agree. I think that psychological moats require kind of like, I think it's like I think of it as a more reinforcement tool than an actual like standalone tool. So I think about it as like, instead of thinking about, okay, I'm going to build a pure tech moat, right? A tech moat, or like a community moat, right? Like, how do you align? It's like, how do you imbue the moats that you're building with like a psychological layer, right? Like,
Excellent
that's how
point.
I think about it. I don't necessarily think about it like, yes, I think any of these things, even any of these things alone, are not defensible, right? Like a tech moat, like, I mean, outside of like IP, like it's not of like IP, right? Like most technologies, like you can replicate most technologies. Like, I don't think that like a lot of companies survive on just one moat, right? So I think like the main opportunity is to think about, how do you reinforce already existing moats, leveraging psychological principles, right? And in that case, those are truly defensible, right? Because it's not necessarily, you're not relying on one facet. You're actually relying on an integrated approach to defend against competitive competition in a way that actually may not be replicable, because like once you kind of start to combine things, they become very unique and very like it becomes more of a conversation around culture, which is also something that is very difficult to replicate, and that becomes valuable to customers and stakeholders. So I think I think what you're looking for at the end of the day is this combination of moats that provide a unique layer of value and defense against competitors.
Yeah, I think that's a very good point, because if you look at Apple, again, to use Apple as an example, they have this technological moat where it's like the hardware in combination with the software. That's one of the reasons why it's so difficult to disrupt Apple, because you can make a phone which is superior in every way, better design, better hardware, a lower price, like superior in every single way. But you're still missing the App Store. You're still and then you have to rely on Android, and it's like it doesn't work as nice with the software, with the hardware. I mean. So that's the technological part. However, there's also, I think, the psychological part where how much of it is due. Why are you buying the most expensive iPhone? How much of that is technology, where it's like, I need a better camera because I want the best camera, and how much of that is conspicuous consumption, which is a signal device. You're signaling to other people, like, look at I have so much money, I have so many extra resources that I can afford this phone, which has much more capabilities than I'll ever need. So there's this mixture of I think that's a really good point, this mixture of technology and psychology.
Yeah, And I think that's where it gets really sweet, because as you mentioned, I think Apple's a good example. I think another really great example is Tesla in the early days. Another really great example of this. I'm trying to think of like a software company that does this really well.
Stripe, maybe.
Stripe doesn't. I mean, I think of like Stripe as more of a commodity based, like a utility than anything else.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah.
I'm trying to think. Yeah, but in general, like I think a lot of solid brands have this integrated approach that makes it even more complicated to like navigate.
Right. Let me wrap up. I'm trying to keep these podcasts somewhere in the range of an hour. I want to ask you one more question.
Sure.
Okay. How should we think about marketing, in your opinion, when you're early stage and when you're a more mature company? Do you have any thoughts there?
Yeah. There's I'm trying to think about there's a saying you don't know what you don't know, or like the quadrant, like you know, I know what I know, I don't know what I don't know, I don't know what I know, or like that four quadrant, I forget what it's called, but essentially I think a lot of startup work is operating in like, I don't know what I don't know. And I think that's what the most challenging part of marketing is. That's when marketing's super challenging. One of the more challenging areas, it's like you don't know what you don't know, and you have to go figure it out. And you have to go figure both out, right? Because then what that does is that allows you to then build the bridge to product to market, and get that product market fit. And so I think in the early stages, everything is an input. Everything is like, it's less about like efficiency and more about, it's efficiency and optimizing for learning, right? I think I think it's less about like, oh, how efficient is this marketing campaign or whatnot. It's more about, what are we learning? How are we taking what we're learning and applying it to all the other things to increase what we know, so that we can say with like high conviction that this is what we know. And I think that mindset is not just for technology. It's not just for marketing, but it's like a whole startup mentality that your team should have. Like everyone should be focused on getting you out of that quadrant, right? Because the more you know, the more you can start to scale operations and scale marketing efforts and scale customers, and et cetera, et cetera. As you get to a larger company, there is a certain complacency, right? And I think like from becoming like a larger, like growth scaled company, like you can get into that same situation where you know what you know, but there's this whole other area where, like, because you've honed in on this one space, you've forgotten that there's a whole nother side out there. And so while I don't like say go into like experiential mode like all the time, but it should, as we mentioned before, there should be an exercise, there should be budget allocated to understanding understanding emerging frontiers, understanding emerging customer types, understanding emerging needs and wants within your ecosystem, and using that as an input for your overall marketing plan and strategy. It shouldn't be like 80% of your budget, but it should be like a good 10 to 15% of your time should go into kind of looking at this diverging area that looks a little bit different than what your core like customers' core marketing strategies are. And it goes into this part where you need to essentially, I think like I always tell folks as they get bigger, you need to disrupt yourself before other people disrupt you. And from a marketing perspective, like that's what needs to happen. Like you don't want, marketing should be like, marketing and sales should be the first signal for the company that something needs to change or something needs to happen. And that goes from experimentation, being in the market, seeing other areas that people may not be taking a look at.
Oh, dude, I could talk to you for like 4 more hours. Yeah, I think you're 100% spot on. I think this is one of the things that we saw going wrong when digital marketing became more and more of an important thing. Too much reliance on the old way. And not being adaptive enough. I do think that the pendulum swung out of whack a little bit, where it was like, now it's like it's all about digital marketing, and people forget like that there are other channels, and that the consumer doesn't just live on the internet, and
No.
there are more things that you can do. So I think that sometimes people forget that. I think this is something which people are more aware of in the FMCG space, fast moving consumer goods, versus like our space where it's more like startup-y and whatnot. Then your marketing education is kind of like digital mostly. But yeah, I think you raise a good point. Yeah, being open to experimentation essentially. All right. I think this is a good place to end it. Dude, thank you so much. This has been awesome, as per usual.
No problem. Thanks for having me. It was good catching up.
Dude, it's always good catching up with you. Where can I send people? Your Twitter handle, the stuff that you're involved in. If there's something that people should check out.
So Twitter handle should cover it all. Chika Umeadik, and then Chika.io, which is my blog. Yeah, those 2 areas should cover it. Yeah, just reach out if you're interested in learning more. I'm always cool to chat with anyone. So just let me know.
All right. Okay, I'm gonna make sure that everything is gonna be in the description below. And now I'm gonna prepare for my class. I got a class after this. So,
oh man.
Yeah. So gotta make sure that I prepare quickly and that it's gonna be good.
Work never stops.
Work never stops. All right, man. I'll catch you later.
All right. Take care.
Take care, buddy. Ciao.
Bye.